The same three words that once meant terror would eventually become her whisper of love, but first, she had to learn the difference between surviving and truly living. The keys felt heavy in her hands as she stood outside apartment 2B. After months of planning, saving every dollar she could hide, and waiting for the right moment, she had finally done it. She had left. The small apartment wasn't much to look at from the outside, but to her it looked like freedom. The building was old, with cracked paint on the walls and a staircase that creaked with every step. But it was hers. For the first time in years, no one else had a key. No one else could walk through that door whenever they wanted. The thought made her hands shake as she turned the lock for the very first time. Inside, the apartment was tiny. The living room was barely big enough for a couch and a small table. The kitchen had just enough space for one person to cook. The bedroom could fit a bed and maybe a small dresser, but every square foot of it belonged to her. She walked from room to room, touching the walls, opening and closing the windows just because she could. Her sister had helped her move the few things she managed to take: 2 suitcases of clothes, some books, a few dishes, and one special coffee mug that belonged to her grandmother. That mug was the only thing that really mattered. It was the one piece of her old life that still felt safe and good. "You did it," her sister said, setting down the last box. "You really did it." There were tears in her eyes, the kind that come when something really hard finally ends. They hugged in the empty living room, and for a moment everything felt possible. That first night was the hardest. She had gotten used to being afraid, to listening for footsteps, to wondering what mood would walk through the door. Now there were no footsteps to worry about, but the quiet felt strange. Every sound from the street made her jump. Every time a neighbor walked by in the hallway, her heart would race. She checked the lock on the front door 3 times before going to bed. Then she got up and checked it 2 more times. The windows, too. Even though she was on the 2nd floor, she made sure they were locked tight. Old habits are hard to break, especially when those habits kept you safe for so long. The next morning she woke up, and for just a moment, she forgot where she was. The sunlight was coming through different windows. The sounds were different. Then she remembered, and a small smile crossed her face. She was free. Her sister had left her a list of phone numbers, a counselor who helped people like her, a legal aid office, a support group that met on Tuesday nights, the local women's shelter where she had first gotten help planning her escape. All these people who understood what she had been through and wanted to help her build something new. The first week was like learning to walk again. Simple things felt complicated. Going to the grocery store alone. Deciding what to have for dinner without asking anyone. Choosing which TV show to watch. These tiny freedoms were overwhelming after years of having every choice made for her. She found a job at a small bookstore downtown. The owner was an older woman who asked few questions and seemed to understand that sometimes people need a fresh start. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to cover rent and food. More importantly, it was hers. Money she earned that no one could take away or control. The bookstore became her safe place. Between the tall shelves filled with stories, she felt protected. Customers were usually quiet, polite people who just wanted to find a good book to read. She learned where everything was kept, helped people find what they were looking for, and slowly began to remember what it felt like to be useful in a good way. Some days were harder than others. She would catch herself looking over her shoulder, even though there was no reason to be worried. Sometimes she would see a man with similar hair or the same build, and her whole body would freeze with fear. But each time it wasn't him. Each time she was still safe. The counselor her sister had found was a kind woman who understood trauma. She explained that healing takes time, that being jumpy and scared was normal after what she had been through. They met once a week in a small office with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Slowly, she began to understand that none of what happened was her fault. "You survived," the counselor told her during one of their sessions. "That took incredible strength. Now we're going to help you learn how to live again." Living was different from surviving. Surviving was about making it through each day without getting hurt. Living was about making choices, having dreams, believing that tomorrow could be better than today. She was learning the difference. Her apartment began to feel more like home as the weeks passed. She bought a small plant for the windowsill. It was nothing fancy, just a little green thing that needed water and sunlight, but taking care of it felt good. She was responsible for keeping something alive and healthy, and she was succeeding. The neighbors were mostly quiet, normal people. There was an elderly man who always said hello when they passed in the hallway. A young mother with a baby who sometimes smiled and waved from across the courtyard. A college student who played music a bit too loud but stopped when asked politely. These small, ordinary interactions reminded her what normal felt like. At night, she would sit by her window and watch the street below. People walking their dogs, couples holding hands, friends laughing as they walked to dinner. The world was full of people living their lives without fear, and she was slowly becoming one of them. The hardest part was learning to trust her own judgment again. For so long, she had been told her thoughts were wrong. Her feelings didn't matter. Her instincts couldn't be trusted. Now she had to remember how to make decisions for herself. What did she want for breakfast? Which book looked interesting? What time should she go to bed? These tiny choices were practice for bigger ones to come. 3 months after moving into her apartment, she realized something important had changed. She had stopped checking the locks multiple times before bed. She only checked once now, and it was just habit, not fear. The difference was huge. Fear makes you check the same lock 5 times because you can't trust your own memory. Habit makes you check once because it's the smart thing to do. Her grandmother's coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, the first thing she saw every morning. It reminded her that she came from strong women. Women who survived difficult times and found ways to be happy. Every morning she would make her coffee in that mug and plan her day. Simple plans, nothing too big, but they were her plans. The bookstore job was going well. She had gotten good at recommending books to customers, and some regulars would ask specifically for her help. It felt wonderful to be known for something positive, to have people trust her opinion about something as important as a good story. As winter turned to spring, she started to believe that she really had escaped. That this new life wasn't temporary, wasn't something that could be taken away. The apartment was truly hers. The job was secure. The fear was fading, replaced by something that felt like hope. 3 months had passed since she first unlocked the door to her own apartment. The therapy sessions were helping more than she expected. Every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, she sat in that comfortable chair and talked about things she had never said out loud before. Her counselor was patient, never pushing too hard, always letting her go at her own pace. "You're not responsible for what happened to you," the counselor said during one session, "but you are responsible for your healing. And you're doing beautifully." Those words stuck with her. She wrote them down in a small notebook she kept by her bed. On the hard days when the old fears crept back in, she would read those words again. The bookstore had become more than just a job. It was her sanctuary. Between the tall shelves of mysteries and romances, biographies and cookbooks, she felt safe. The smell of paper and coffee from the little cafe next door created a world that felt far away from her past life. Regular customers started to recognize her, asking for her recommendations, trusting her judgment about which book might be perfect for them. "You have a real gift for this," her boss told her one afternoon. "You always seem to know exactly what people need to read." That comment made her feel proud in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She was good at something. People valued her opinion. She mattered in a positive way. It was on a quiet Thursday morning that he first walked in. Tall, with kind eyes and an easy smile, he headed straight for the new releases section like he knew exactly where he was going. She watched him from behind the counter, noting how gently he handled the books, how he seemed to read the first few pages of several before making his choice. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the counter with 3 books in his hand. "I'm looking for something similar to these, but maybe a bit more hopeful? I've been reading too many sad stories lately." His voice was soft, patient. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. She looked at his selections and smiled slightly. All 3 were beautiful but heavy books about loss and grief. "I think I know exactly what you need," she said, coming around from behind the counter. She led him to the fiction section and pulled out a book about a woman who starts over in a small town. "This one has some sad parts, but it ends with hope. Real hope. Not just fake happy endings." He read the back cover, flipped through a few pages, and nodded. "Perfect. Thank you." That was the beginning. Every Tuesday he came in looking for something new to read. Every Tuesday she had a recommendation ready. They started having longer conversations about the books, about authors they both enjoyed, about stories that stayed with you long after you finished reading them. "I'm sorry," he said one Tuesday after they had been talking for nearly 20 minutes about a mystery series. "I'm probably keeping you from your work." Not at all, she replied and realized she meant it. I enjoy talking about books. It's the best part of this job. His name was David, which made her tense up at first because that was also the name of the person she had escaped from. But this David was nothing like the other one. This David listened when she talked. He never interrupted or told her she was wrong. He never made her feel small or stupid. After 6 weeks of Tuesday visits, he asked if she might like to get coffee sometime. Her first instinct was to run. Every alarm in her head went off at once. But then she remembered what her counselor had been teaching her about the difference between past fear and present reality. This man had never raised his voice. He had never made her uncomfortable. He had never pushed when she seemed hesitant about anything. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself. But maybe we could start with coffee here at the cafe next door. During my lunch break? That sounds perfect, he said, and she believed him. Their first coffee together was awkward in the sweetest way. She found herself watching his hands, noting how he held his cup gently, how he never made sudden movements. She noticed that he always waited for her to speak first, never filling every silence with words like some people do. I should probably tell you, she said halfway through their coffee. I'm not very good at this. Dating, I mean. It's been a while. That's okay, he replied simply. We don't have to call it dating if that feels like too much pressure. We can just call it two people who like books having coffee. That was exactly what she needed to hear. No pressure. No expectations. Just two people sharing something they both enjoyed. Over the next few weeks, their Tuesday coffee meetings became something she looked forward to. He told her about his job at the community center, working with kids who needed extra help with reading. She told him about the books that had meant the most to her over the years, the stories that had helped her through difficult times. She was careful not to share too much about her past. Not because she was ashamed, but because she wasn't ready. He seemed to understand this without her having to explain it. He never pushed for personal details, never asked why she sometimes went quiet in the middle of conversations, never questioned why she always chose seats where she could see the door. You're very observant, her counselor noted during one of their sessions. You're learning to trust your instincts about people. That's a big step forward, it was true. With this new David, she felt calm instead of anxious. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. When he laughed, it was genuine and warm. When she recommended a book and he didn't like it, he would say so kindly, explaining what didn't work for him without making her feel bad about the suggestion. One Tuesday, it was raining heavily when her lunch break arrived. The cafe next door was crowded with people trying to stay dry. Would you like to have coffee at my place instead? He asked. It's just a few blocks away and I make decent coffee. Every instinct screamed no. Going to a man's apartment felt like the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. But then she looked at his face, really looked at it, and saw only kindness there. No hidden agenda. No pressure. Just a simple offer from someone who had become a friend. I'd like that, she heard herself say. His apartment was small and neat, filled with bookshelves and plants. Classical music played softly in the background. Everything felt peaceful and safe. He made coffee exactly the way she liked it, remembering details from their previous conversations. They sat on opposite ends of his couch, talking about a new book that had just come out. She found herself relaxing, laughing at his stories about the kids he worked with, sharing her own funny experiences from the bookstore. When it was time for her to go back to work, he walked her to the door. Thank you for trusting me enough to come here, he said quietly. I know that wasn't easy. The fact that he understood that he recognized what a big step this had been for her meant everything. He wasn't taking her trust for granted. He knew it was precious and fragile. Walking back to the bookstore in the gentle rain, she realized something important had shifted. For the first time since her escape, she had spent time alone with a man and felt completely safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe too. She had been herself, expressed her opinions, laughed freely, and never once worried about saying the wrong thing. That night, she called her sister to share the news about her new friendship. He sounds wonderful, her sister said. But how are you feeling about all this? Scared, she admitted. But also hopeful. Is it possible to feel both things at the same time? I think that's exactly how healing is supposed to feel. 6 months had passed since she moved into her little apartment and life had started to feel normal. Really normal. She woke up each morning without that tight feeling in her chest. She went to work at the bookstore, had her Tuesday coffee meetings with David, and came home to her own space where no one could hurt her. The therapy sessions were helping her understand that she deserved this peace. But on a Wednesday afternoon in October, everything changed. She was at the grocery store, the big one on 5th Street where she always shopped because it felt safe and familiar. The aisles were wide, the lighting was bright, and she knew where everything was located. She was in the pasta aisle, reaching for her favorite brand of marinara sauce, when she saw him, or thought she saw him. The man had the same height, the same build, the same way of walking that had haunted her dreams for months. Her heart stopped beating for what felt like forever, then started racing so fast she thought it might burst out of her chest. The glass jar of sauce slipped from her shaking hands and crashed to the floor, sending red sauce and glass pieces everywhere. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she whispered, backing away from the mess. People were staring. The man who might have been him was walking toward her aisle. She couldn't breathe. The bright lights of the store suddenly felt too harsh. The wide aisles felt like they were closing in on her. "Honey, are you okay?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez, the store manager who had seen the whole thing happen. She was a kind woman in her 50s who always remembered her customers' names. "Don't worry about the mess. These things happen all the time." But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept looking toward the end of the aisle, waiting for that familiar face to appear, waiting for her whole new life to come crashing down like that jar of sauce. "I have to go," she managed to say, leaving her cart right there and rushing toward the exit. Mrs. Rodriguez called after her, concerned, but she couldn't stop to explain. She had to get out, had to get home, had to get behind her locked door where she was safe. The drive home was a blur. Every car behind her looked suspicious. Every man on the sidewalk might be him. By the time she got to her apartment, she was crying so hard she could barely see to unlock the door. Once inside, she checked every lock twice, then 3 times, then 4 times, before finally sinking onto her couch. It wasn't him. Deep down, she knew it wasn't him. The man in the store had been taller, his hair was different, and he was with a woman and 2 small children. But her body didn't know the difference. Her body only remembered danger and reacted the same way it always had when threat felt real. She called in sick to work the next day, something she had never done before. She couldn't face leaving the apartment. What if he really was in town? What if he had found her? What if this new life she had built so carefully was about to disappear? David knocked on her door Thursday evening. She had missed their Tuesday coffee and he was worried. "I brought soup," he said through the door. "Mrs. Rodriguez from the grocery store asked me to check on you. She was concerned after what happened yesterday." Of course Mrs. Rodriguez knew David. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone, especially the kind people who made an effort to care about others. She opened the door but kept the chain lock attached, looking at him through the narrow gap. "I'm okay," she lied, "just not feeling well." But David had become good at reading her over the past few months. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way she was holding herself like she expected something terrible to happen. "Would you like to talk about it?" he asked gently. "I can stay out here in the hallway if that feels safer." That's when she broke down. Standing there with the chain still on her door, she told him everything. About her past, about why she had moved here, about the man in the grocery store who probably wasn't who she thought he was, but had triggered every defense mechanism she had spent months learning to control. David listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything, without telling her she was being silly or overreacting. When she finished, he simply said, "I'm sorry that happened to you. What can I do to help right now?" She let him in. They sat on opposite ends of her small couch, and he didn't try to move closer or touch her, understanding that she needed space to feel safe. He had brought more than just soup. He had brought groceries so she wouldn't have to leave the apartment if she wasn't ready. "I thought I was getting better," she said, stirring the soup he had heated for her. "I thought I was past all this fear." "Healing isn't a straight line," David replied, repeating something he had probably learned in his work with troubled kids. "Sometimes you take steps backward before you can move forward again. That doesn't mean you're not getting better." Her counselor said the same thing when she called for an emergency session the next day. "What you experienced is called a trigger," she explained. "It's your nervous system trying to protect you based on past experiences. It doesn't mean you're weak or that you haven't made progress." They spent the session working on grounding techniques, ways to bring herself back to the present moment when her mind started spiraling into old fears. breathing exercises that could slow her racing heart, ways to remind herself that she was safe now, that the past couldn't reach her in her current life. But the effects of that grocery store incident lasted for weeks. She found herself looking over her shoulder again, jumping at unexpected sounds, checking the locks multiple times before bed. The progress she had made felt fragile, like it could disappear at any moment. David was patient through all of it. He didn't push her to go back to their normal routine. Instead, he adjusted to meet her where she was. When she wasn't ready to go out for coffee, he brought coffee to the bookstore during her breaks. When she seemed jumpy in crowded places, he suggested quieter alternatives. One evening, about 3 weeks after the grocery store incident, they were sitting in her apartment reading quietly. She was curled up on one end of the couch with a mystery novel, while he sat on the other end with a book about teaching methods. The silence was comfortable, peaceful. "Thank you," she said suddenly, looking up from her book. "For what?" he asked, setting down his own book to give her his full attention. "For not leaving when things got complicated, for not making me feel like I'm broken or too much trouble." "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You're healing. And healing sometimes gets messy. That's okay." She realized in that moment how different this felt from her past relationship. When she had been struggling before, it was used against her. Her fears were mocked, her needs ignored, her pain dismissed. But David saw her struggles and responded with kindness. He saw her fear and offered safety. He saw her healing and supported it without trying to rush it. The grocery store gradually became less scary. Mrs. Rodriguez always made sure to say hello when she shopped there, creating a sense of community and safety. She started going during off-peak hours when it was less crowded, giving herself time to adjust slowly. Her counselor helped her understand that setbacks were actually a normal part of recovery. "Think of it like learning to walk after an injury," she said. "Some days you might limp. Some days you might need to use crutches, but you're still moving forward." By November, she was feeling stronger again. The incident had taught her that healing wasn't just about feeling better. It was also about learning how to handle the times when old fears came back. She had tools now. She had support. She had people who cared about her well-being. Most importantly, she had learned that one bad day didn't erase all her progress. She could feel scared and still be brave. She could take steps backward and still be moving forward. She could be triggered by the past and still trust in her future. The apartment that had once felt like just a hiding place now truly felt like home. Not because nothing bad could happen there, but because she had learned she was strong enough to handle whatever did happen. A full year had passed since she first turned the key to her own apartment. The bookstore job had become more than just work. She was now the assistant manager, helping to order new books and train other employees. Her Tuesday coffee meetings with David had grown into something beautiful and steady. They had never put a label on their relationship, but it felt like love. Safe, patient, genuine love. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Therapy sessions had moved from weekly to every other week. She was sleeping through the night most of the time. The locks on her door were checked once before bed, out of habit rather than fear. She had even started making friends with some of her regular customers at the bookstore. Then the phone call came. It was Detective Martinez from the city where she used to live. Her hand started shaking the moment she heard his official tone. "I'm calling about your ex-husband," he said gently, clearly understanding how difficult this conversation would be. "He's been arrested. There's been an incident with another woman, and we need to talk to you about testifying." The world seemed to stop spinning. She had to sit down right there in the bookstore, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Customers browsed around her, completely unaware that her carefully built new life had just been shaken to its foundation. "Is she okay?" was the first thing she managed to ask. "The other woman?" "She's alive," Detective Martinez replied. "But she's been hurt and she's scared. A lot like you were when you first came to us for help. The similarities were heartbreaking. Another woman had fallen into the same trap, had believed the same promises, had endured the same treatment. But unlike her own situation, this time there was a witness. This time neighbors had called the police. This time there was enough evidence to press charges. "We understand this is difficult," the detective continued, "but your testimony could make the difference in this case. You documented everything so well when you left. You have medical records, photos, police reports. Your story could help establish a pattern." After hanging up, she sat in the storage room of the bookstore for 20 minutes, trying to process what she had just heard. The thought of seeing him again, even in a courtroom, made her feel sick. The idea of telling strangers about the worst moments of her life seemed impossible. But then she thought about that other woman, probably feeling just as trapped and hopeless as she had felt 2 years ago. David found her there when he came by for their usual coffee break. One look at her face told him something was seriously wrong. "What happened?" he asked, sitting down beside her on a stack of book boxes. She told him everything. About the phone call, about the choice she had to make, about how terrified she was of going back to that city and facing her past in such a public way. David listened without interrupting, his face growing more serious as she spoke. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," he said finally. "But I think you should know something. You're not the same person who left that city a year ago. You're stronger now, braver, and you won't be facing this alone." Her counselor said something similar during an emergency session that afternoon. "This is your choice entirely," she emphasized. "No one can make it for you, but I want you to consider how far you've come. A year ago you were running from your past. Now you have the opportunity to face it from a position of strength." The decision tormented her for days. She talked it through with her sister over long phone calls. She discussed it with David during walks around her neighborhood. She journaled about it, made lists of pros and cons, and lost sleep over it. Finally, she realized the decision had already been made. She couldn't live with herself knowing she had the power to help another woman and chose not to use it. The girl who had once been too scared to speak up for herself was ready to speak up for someone else. "I'll do it," she told Detective Martinez when she called him back. "I'll testify." The weeks leading up to the trial were some of the hardest she had experienced since leaving. She had to relive her story multiple times with prosecutors, explaining details she had tried to forget. She had to look at old photos that documented her injuries, photos that made David visibly angry when he accidentally saw them. "I should have been there to protect you," he said one evening after a particularly difficult preparation session. "You couldn't have been," she replied. "We hadn't met yet. But you're here now, and that matters more than you know." Her sister flew in from across the country to be there for the trial. It was the first time they had been together since the day she moved into her apartment, and having that familiar support meant everything. The night before her testimony, she barely slept. She kept running through what she wanted to say, worried she would forget important details or break down on the witness stand. David sat with her, not saying much, just being present while she worked through her anxiety. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked as they sat on her couch in the early morning hours. "You've already proven you're strong enough," he replied. "You survived. You escaped. You built a new life. Tomorrow is just one more step in that journey." The courthouse was exactly as intimidating as she had expected. Gray stone walls, security guards, people in suits hurrying back and forth with important-looking papers. But she wasn't alone. David sat in the gallery behind her. Her sister held her hand until it was time to take the stand. The prosecutor, a kind woman named Ms. Johnson, had prepared her well for what to expect. When they called her name, she walked to the front of the courtroom on legs that felt like jelly. She could see him sitting at the defendant's table, looking older and smaller than she remembered. For just a moment, she felt that familiar fear wash over her. Then she saw the other woman in the gallery, young, scared, with healing bruises on her arms that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked exactly like she herself had looked a year ago. That's when her fear transformed into something else entirely. Determination. She took the oath and began to speak. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger as she told her story. She talked about the escalation of control and intimidation. She described the isolation from friends and family. She explained the fear that had dominated every day of her life for 3 long years. The defense attorney tried to rattle her, suggesting she was exaggerating or seeking attention. But she had prepared for this. She answered every question calmly and honestly, sticking to the facts, letting the truth speak for itself. When the other woman testified, their stories were heartbreakingly similar. The same patterns, the same excuses, the same cycle that had trapped them both. But this time there were witnesses. This time there was evidence. This time justice felt possible. The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, the jury returned a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with a permanent restraining order protecting both women. As they left the courthouse, the other woman approached her in the hallway. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "I don't think I could have done this without knowing I wasn't alone." "You're stronger than you know," she replied, words that someone had once said to her. "And you're going to be okay. Better than okay." Flying home felt like the end of a very long chapter. She had faced her worst fear and survived. More than survived, she had helped someone else find their way to safety. The girl who had once been too terrified to speak her own name in court had found her voice and used it to protect another person. David was waiting for her at the airport with flowers and the biggest smile she had ever seen from him. "How do you feel?" he asked as they drove home. "Free," she said, and meant it completely. Finally, truly free. 2 years had passed since the trial, and life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The small apartment that had once been her sanctuary was now filled with memories of laughter, quiet conversations, and the kind of peace she had never thought possible. David had moved in 6 months ago, but not in the rushed way that comes from desperation or fear of being alone. This decision came from love, from wanting to share their lives more completely. The bookstore had offered her the manager position when her boss decided to retire. She accepted, thrilled by the opportunity to shape the place that had become so important to her healing journey. The store was thriving under her care, hosting book clubs, author readings, and community events that brought people together over shared stories. "You've turned this place into the heart of the neighborhood," Mrs. Rodriguez from the grocery store told her one afternoon, while browsing the new fiction section. "My daughter says this is where all the teenagers come to find books that actually understand them." That comment filled her with pride. She had created something positive, something that helped other people find comfort and escape in the same way books had helped her during her darkest times. The shy woman who had once been afraid to make eye contact with customers now gave reading recommendations to the local newspaper and led monthly discussions about the books that changed people's lives. David's work at the community center had expanded too. He now ran programs for families in crisis, helping children cope with difficult situations at home. Sometimes she would visit him at work, watching him patiently help a child sound out difficult words or encourage a teenager to try writing their own story. His gentleness with people who were hurting reminded her every day of why she had fallen in love with him. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, like a plant that needed just the right amount of sunlight and water. There had been no dramatic declarations or grand gestures, just a steady deepening of trust and affection. They had learned each other's rhythms, triggers, and healing patterns. When she had nightmares, he knew to turn on the bedside lamp and let her talk through her dreams without trying to fix anything. When he had difficult days with the kids at work, she knew to make his favorite dinner and give him space to process his emotions. The therapy sessions had ended 6 months ago, though her counselor had made it clear the door was always open if she needed support. "You've developed all the tools you need," she had said during their final session. "Trust yourself to use them." She had started volunteering at the women's shelter where she had first gotten help planning her escape. Once a month, she would sit with new arrivals, sharing her story and listening to theirs. It was difficult work, but incredibly meaningful. These women saw in her what was possible, that the fear and desperation they felt wasn't permanent, that healing was real, that happiness could be found again. "How did you know you were ready to trust someone again?" a young woman asked during one of these sessions. She couldn't have been older than 22, with the same haunted look that had once stared back from mirrors. "I didn't know," she answered honestly. "I was terrified. But I had learned the difference between someone who wants to control you and someone who wants to support you. The right person will be patient with your fear instead of angry about it." These conversations reminded her how far she had traveled from that scared woman who had first turned the key to apartment 2B. That woman had been focused entirely on survival, on making it through each day without being found or hurt. This woman was focused on living, on building something beautiful and lasting. The apartment they shared now was bigger, with better security and windows that let in more light. But more importantly, it felt like home in a way that had nothing to do with locks or safety systems. It was filled with books they had read together, plants they took turns watering, photos from quiet adventures around their small town. There were pictures of her sister's wedding, where David had been welcomed into the family with open arms. There were ticket stubs from movies they had enjoyed and concert programs from local performances they had attended. On quiet evenings, they would cook dinner together, each handling the tasks they preferred. She liked chopping vegetables and measuring spices, while he was better with timing and making sure nothing burned. They would eat at the small table by the window, talking about their days, sharing funny stories from work, or discussing whatever books they were currently reading. "I never thought I could feel this content," she told him one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Content is a beautiful way to feel," he replied, drying the dishes she washed. "It means you're not waiting for your real life to begin anymore." That observation struck her as profound. For so many years she had felt like she was waiting for the next argument to end, waiting for a good day, waiting for change that never came. Then she had been waiting to feel safe, waiting to heal, waiting to trust again. Now she wasn't waiting for anything. She was simply living day by day in a life that felt genuine and chosen. One Thursday evening in late spring, they were getting ready for bed after a particularly good day. The bookstore had received a shipment of highly anticipated new releases, and she had spent the afternoon matching books with eager customers who'd been waiting months to read them. David had successfully helped a struggling reader at the center sound out an entire story for the first time. They were both tired but satisfied with how they had spent their day. As they moved through their nighttime routine, she brushing her teeth while he set out clothes for tomorrow, he locking the front door while she turned down the bed, she realized she wasn't thinking about safety at all. She was simply preparing for sleep in the home she shared with someone she loved. "Did you remember to lock the front door?" she asked as they settled into bed, David already reaching for the mystery novel he had been enjoying. "Yep, all locked up," he replied, then looked at her with a gentle smile. "Everything okay?" For a moment she was transported back to those early days in her first apartment, when checking locks had been an obsession born of terror. Then she was reminded of all the Tuesday afternoons in the bookstore when David had first started visiting. How safe he had made her feel just by being kind and patient. Finally, she thought about this moment, this bed, this man beside her who knew her whole story and loved her not despite it, but including it. "Everything's perfect," she said, and realized she meant it completely. She reached over to turn off the bedside lamp, then paused and looked at David one more time. In the soft glow of the light, his face showed the same gentleness that had first made her feel safe, the same patience that had helped her learn to trust again. "Lock the door," she whispered. But this time the words held no fear. This time she smiled as she said them, because she understood now that the door wasn't being locked to keep danger out. It was being locked to keep love in, to protect the beautiful life they had built together, to create a sacred space where healing could continue and happiness could grow. "Already did," David replied softly, understanding without needing explanation that this moment meant something special to her. As she turned off the light and settled into sleep beside him, she thought about that scared woman who had once checked locks 5 times each night. That woman had been protecting herself the only way she knew how. This woman was choosing to share her life with someone who made locks unnecessary, even though she was grateful they existed. The darkness felt peaceful instead of threatening. Tomorrow would bring another day of work she enjoyed, people she cared about, and small moments of joy she had learned not to take for granted. But for now, in this moment behind this locked door, she was exactly where she belonged.